So I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar on Participatory Design Development for Sanitation. My name is Jamie Myers and I work for the CLTS Knowledge Hub. I'll be facilitating the session along with Petra, but we are not the main attraction here today. The main attraction is Ben Cole. He has been working on rural sanitation and hygiene programs for the last 11 years across Southeast Asia and Africa. He'll be discussing his experiences in applying participatory design in Malawi, which was the topic of our first Frontiers series. He will take us through the 3-day workshop and is keen to hear from other participants about experiences in their own country. We are going to try and make this as much of a participatory exercise as possible. As you can see, there is this question box, which most of you have been writing in already. If you'd like to put questions in this box throughout the presentation and during the discussion, and at the end of the presentation, I will be asking Ben Cole some of these questions, trying to group them together. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the CLTS Knowledge Hub website soon. So I think that's enough of me. I'd like to pass over to Ben, who will tell you lots more.
That's great. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for the introduction. And thanks to everyone for logging in and listening to this webinar. I know everyone's got busy schedules, and I know it's often hard to actually schedule in a webinar to make the time to listen. So I'm honoured to have you listening to what I have to say and describe. And as Jamie said, we're really keen to get as much information from you as possible to make it as participatory as possible. And so please do write as much information as you're willing to divulge, I suppose, or interested in sort of presenting into the question box, because we're actually going to get a screen dump of all of that information, and I think it could be a really good starting place for other people, other organisations that are interested in this approach and even applying this approach. Could be a great starting point for that network, understanding what people have done now and what they're interested in. So I'll begin. Actually, before I do, Jamie, just so I feel like I'm talking into an empty box, can you just confirm you can hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay. So
if people are unable to hear, perhaps you could put it in the questions section. If you'd like Ben to, if you think Ben's speaking too quietly.
All right. Well, let me know, Jamie.
To hear you well.
I'll continue, and the presentation goes for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then I'm hoping we can open it up to addressing some of the key themes or the key questions that are coming out. So let's begin. Participatory design, a natural extension to CLTS programming, and I've put a question mark there because it's very early days, and it's really based on my experience working in Malawi for the last 4 years, both as a consultant and a staff member for UNICEF Malawi. So really this presentation is based on those experiences, and so yeah, please take it in that context. So I know Jamie's asked you already to provide your name, where you work, who you work for, and your role. That'll be really interesting for me as the presenter to know who made the time and effort to listen. And of course, later on, if we have the chance to interact, I'll know that you've heard this talk, and we can start at a different level. So I wanted to give you, I guess at the very start, what I'm hoping you take home, or you sort of learn from this presentation. And this is all, again, from my point of view. It's not a presentation from UNICEF, although the work was done under UNICEF. This is certainly coming from Ben Cole. The first one is market research. Do it. If you haven't done it yet, do it now. If you're halfway through, do it. If you're at the end, do it. I think market research and formative research is so important in in understanding whether you should be using participatory design or not. Participatory design, from our experiences in Malawi, I would say try it, test it, and then make sure you share your experiences. And then the last one is, if you do get to a point where new designs are arising, test it, both structurally from a safety point of view, and then of course take it back to the market and see if it's a viable design. So they're the take-home messages I'm hoping you get from this talk. All right, let's start on the sort of, I guess, the participatory bit. It's not just sitting there listening with your earphones on and possibly having a nice cup of tea or a crumpet or something along those lines. I'm hoping you could just answer these two questions. So have you observed slippage in ODF status where your sanitation program is operating? And if you have, why do you think it's occurring? And, you know, happy for you to give your own personal reasons or to give what is the conventional wisdom, but really would be interested to hear from you all. So if you can take a bit of time just typing as I talk away or drone away, depending on your willingness to listen to an Australian accent. But yeah, please, if you can, answer those questions. That'd be super. 52 people is an amazing number of sanitation professionals and practitioners to have. So yeah, that information will be great. So as I've described or mentioned earlier, in the first step we did was in Malawi, which was back in 2011, was to conduct formative research. We recognised, or certainly the longer term staff in Malawi recognised, that Malawi had relatively low rates of OD, open defecation, and CLTS had been doing well anecdotally. Nothing quantitatively, but certainly anecdotally district government was saying it was working, village chiefs were telling us it was working, and you know, there's been some sort of more proven evidence of that where we've had whole administrative areas becoming open defecation free through CLTS. But also what we were finding is that, or what we knew was that there were high rates of slippage after CLTS triggering, and that those high rates were particularly during or after the rainy season. So we knew that basically in February, possibly people, you know, open defecation was moving up much higher than 11% until people had the chance and opportunity to rebuild. So through that research, we found three sort of headline findings. So the first one was the one I've just described, like we quantified that. We really found strong evidence that said there's seasonal variations in latrine ownership, that up to 40 to 60% of households who had traditional pit latrines, they were collapsing during or after the rainy season. We also found out through qualitative interviews that there was a strong sense of despondency with the existing designs. People were just tired of constantly rebuilding the same thing over and over again, and that was creating tension sort of within the family a little bit between the female and the male head of household, because the male head of household was sort of responsible for the bulk of the construction, whereas the female head of household was the one that really wanted the latrine rebuilt. And we also heard that people would never put cement in their latrine before they put cement in their home. So that was for us the three sort of key headline findings from the market research. So now throwing that, I guess, back to you, the participants, have you ever conducted market research or formative research where your sanitation program is operating? I mean, it could have been a baseline, it could have been a midterm evaluation, could have been a outcome evaluation. Have you done anything in regards to market research on what's happening out there in your sanitation program? And if you have, can you just, as far as you're concerned, in your opinion, what were the top three headline findings? Again, that would be very interesting for me. So the market research really laid the foundation for identifying and choosing to do participatory design methodology, because what we had heard very loud and clear is that people wanted to have latrines. There was, we know 90% of households already had a latrine, but they were despondent about the existing designs. So that really indicated to us we need to work on the design side. And it also made us think, well, if we're going to look at the design side, like if we're going to spend time on coming up with new innovations or just making existing options better, how are we going to do that? And so we looked at what people have been doing in Southeast Asia, particularly in Vietnam and Cambodia, where they had used international designers, international design teams to come and really conduct a human-centered design approach where they did very in-depth market research, but then took that evidence, used it for early prototyping, took it back to audiences, and then sort of presented the designs to them. But it was an approach that you would describe as being designer-led. It was not so much participatory as designer-led. But we recognise some really interesting differences between the contexts in Vietnam and Cambodia, particularly, and Malawi, that came from the market research. In Malawi, the road infrastructure was really bad, so we knew that the design had to be very localised. Cement was really expensive. It's some of the most expensive cement in the world in Malawi. So we knew that using cement as a core building material was going to be too expensive for the program, but also overall for the household. And they've told us we're not going to put it before we put it in our home anyway. So we ruled out the use of cement. And also entrepreneurship, it wasn't described from our interviews and our market research. We didn't feel there was a strong sense of entrepreneurship. And all of these contrasted quite differently to the experience in Southeast Asia, where you do have pretty good roads, or certainly comparatively you have good roads, even to the sort of secondary and tertiary level. You have pretty cheap cement because they're making it there. And you have pretty motivated entrepreneurs. Certainly my time in Vietnam proved to me how motivated the entrepreneurs could be there. So that's why we looked at the different design processes and approaches, and we identified participatory design as a methodology we wanted to try. So participatory design is certainly nothing new, and it's an approach that has been used for a number of industries, ranging from IT, information technology, to urban design, to architecture. It's been used in the health services industry as well. And it's really a process and procedure, not a design style. So it's not like that's a postmodern design, or that's a Bauhaus design approach. It's more the process of engagement. And these two terms, users and researchers, designers, are used throughout the sort of, I guess, the theoretical and the practitioner's use of participatory design. So a user is someone, of course, it makes sense. The user is someone who uses it. And the researcher designer is someone who's externally engaged to try and develop a better design. So the interface between users and researchers, designers is really important in participatory design methodology. And it stems from the approach used in the 1970s and 80s in Scandinavia, where new technology was coming into factories, and a lot of it was quite computerized, and they recognized that there was a lot of resistance from the tradespeople and the people working on the factory floor to this new technology. And so they started to apply participatory design, where they effectively engaged the people who would be using the machines or using the computers in the actual design process right from the very beginning. So what did they want? How would they be using it? And then providing input into how the technology might actually be designed and then finally refined and used in the factory. And then since then, then in the 80s and 90s, it was also picked up by the United States labor movement. So the unions were very interested in it as a sort of a democratization process to allow people, workers, trade unions to present their own opinion on designs. And so that quote from Steen there really captures it. It attempts to give future users of a system a role in design, implementation and evaluation. And it should really be noted in Carr and Chambers, in the very first CLTS handbook, if you get right to the end, it says a lot about supply support, and one of the sort of quotes is to encourage local innovation and production. And what participatory design does is it legitimizes and acknowledges users in the design process. So it's not just about inviting them to a workshop and saying, hey, what do you know about toilets, and can you build a better one than what we've got now? It's about an entire process of making sure that users are engaged and, I guess, interested in the sanitation technology they're using. And also, participatory design is really good for getting divergent groups together. Certainly in Malawi, the environmental health officers who are responsible for sanitation coverage didn't really have the opportunity to talk much to suppliers who build toilets, and even perhaps less time directly to households who were having toilets or not having toilets for whatever reason. So participatory design brings these sort of divergent people together, and it can help sort of bring, I guess, a complex issue. It can help, or maybe complex or maybe conflicted issue. It can bring that issue forward just through the process. That's certainly the theory anyway, and that's I've got to say it's what we did find in Malawi. So this little diagram here is just a very quick sketch of participatory design. I just got a little comic to draw for me. It's just quick 5 stages. I don't need to talk through it for now, but it just sort of shows the process, illustrates it. So in Malawi, we went to 3 areas, and we did 3 of these sessions in each of the districts. So I think that's all pretty straightforward. We can go back to costing later, but I should mention that it was the first time we'd done it, and I think that's a lot. Like we've definitely reduced costs since then, and we've certainly trained local government staff in participatory design, and they're saying they could really do it, for the price of them going out there and spending 3 days with the community. So really just their petrol costs. So I think, yeah, we can talk further about budget if it's a question that comes up. But it was conducted, we developed it over 3 days. It was a 3-day workshop effectively. So the first thing you do is, who do you invite? So you want these divergent groups that are related and engaged in the sanitation program. So we invited government staff, local sanitation suppliers, and we had criteria. They had to have built a latrine in the past 6 months. And then we invited villages, and within those villages we wanted, in areas where they'd conducted COTS, we wanted them we wanted the natural leaders to come as well, because we recognised they would be engaged and interested in the program, and also probably the ones thinking about this stuff the most. So day 1 is about setting up your teams. So what you do is you make each team have a representative from each of those groups. So ours had 2 government staff, and they were environmental health officers and assistant environmental health officers. We had 3 sanitation suppliers and 2 villages, and often a local village health worker or someone who had been engaged in a health program. So the teams had 8 people in total, and we had 4 teams. So it was quite a big group, and we actually reduced that a little bit in size as the workshops went on. But we started with that, and you certainly get a lot of information from that amount of people. And you start just by asking them to draw, and you can see it there on the right, draw the most common types of latrine or toilets in the local village area where they're based. And we found we got very consistent themes. And then we asked them to list the advantages and disadvantages of these different types. So they literally just listed, so what's the advantage of this type that's described here, and what's the disadvantage of that? And then from there, we asked them, we set the design question. So the design question was, can we create a toilet that matches what the majority of villagers want, need, and can afford using local materials? So at that point we had a lot of discussion about what represented local materials, and a lot of people were arguing to include cement. And we really felt that it was important not to include cement based on our market research, we knew that it wasn't something that most people could afford, nor was it really a local material because it's not readily available. So we did get them to discount, no design could include cement. So then we got them to sit down. So in the first half of the day, they just drew out what they knew. So we started with the knowledge that they knew and felt comfortable with and talked about advantages and disadvantages. And in the second half of the day, we got them to start prototyping. And so we gave them that design criteria that I've just read out. And then we said, we want lots of ideas, not just good ideas. So really just feel free and just draw whatever you want and discuss and debate. But at the end of the day, we want you to have identified 2 that you'd like to go on and actually prototype with real building materials tomorrow. So that's your second day. So the second day is when you have a small stock of local building materials. You should have got them ready, a couple of days before, but also be ready in case people request other things that they want. So you should have some sort of logistics ready. For this prototyping, you need some open space, and ideally with a little bit of shade as well. A really hot, long day of prototyping outside can be exhausting for everyone. So that's a few tips. But it's really about developing like little mini models or even full size, but obviously you're not digging the whole pit underneath. So that picture on the left, they did basically a full size, like very sort of thin cement layer, no not cement, mud layer across that one, but they were working on the roofing. And the one on the right is some people were working on the bricks, making rings for sandy soil conditions. So on the third day, we got them to the first part of the day. We invited local villagers, people just walking by, but also we asked the village chief to invite some specifically to come and have a look at the designs. So that picture on the right shows you a group of people just asking the teams, the sort of, the design teams, how did you come up with it? How strong is it? What materials were included? So that's a really interesting process because it makes the design team sort of think and sort of, I guess, on their feet. They have to kind of respond to some of the challenges that are put forward. And then we got them to do a very detailed costing as well. So that was not just materials but labour as well, how long they thought it would be constructed for. So that's really helpful as well for getting a sense of, are you within a price range that local people are willing to afford. So there were two main designs that came out very strongly. Well, sorry, there was one very main one that came out, and it was the corbelled flooring. And corbelling is basically just putting one brick over another and overlaying it. So it was identified in 2 areas, Mangotchi and Nkata Bay, and it was actually a number of households already were doing it. But it was a traditional building knowledge that was not well diffused and hadn't really been refined in any way. So the top picture there is just a local chief in Mangotchi saying, oh, we can do corbelling, and he just showed us very quickly and stood on it. And then the bottom corbelled one there that looks like a beehive is one of the ones that's been refined by Misuzu University, and I can talk about that a bit further. So I wanted to show you this. I mean, this is, oops, sorry. Yeah, I'll just show you this video. This was in one of the villages that were already corbelling. And they just brought this technology out very quickly. And you can see they're just layering a small overhang of brick over the bottom layer. So for me, the main message I got from this was that participatory design was really good at bringing out these local existing technologies that I think, well, they had been overlooked. They're not technologies that people had actually given any time or effort to, even though local people were already building them and using them successfully in the local conditions. So the second design that came out that was very interesting was an Nkokwe, the use of a small grain, miniature grain storage area, and then the use of sandbags to support it and create a stronger foundation. And this was put forward in very sandy lakeshore areas where along Lake Malawi. So no one had heard of this idea or concept before, and it was a very interesting technology that's still being explored by the Misuza University. So at that point, I've been speaking for 20 minutes, so I'm almost finished. But I wanted you to answer a few questions for me. So, you know, participatory design is not new. I'm sure other people have used similar approaches or even the exact same approach. So I'd love to know if people could write in the question box if they've used it before, which country and when, how long ago, what were the outcomes, and then also I'm very interested in what were your successes and challenges. So for me, I'm going to speak to those about the successes and challenges and some tips in the last 5 minutes. But if you could just jot those questions down and then answer them when you have time, or just answer them now in the question box, that'll be great. That'll be really, really interesting information. So some key lessons from Malawi. So we had a lot of issues with a number of the groups on the first day about basically wanting to include cement as a construction product. They were just arguing that that cement should be included because it's part of a subsidised program, and they saw the UNICEF car, and it took a lot of discussion. And in fact, it was a really good discussion and helped with a lot of, I guess, understanding of government's policy, so that subsidies are no longer accepted except under the most extreme conditions in Malawi. So that was great for government staff members to be able to explain that to people, particularly key people that were engaged in the sanitation programs. And then making sure that you've got specific design criteria. So again, like we eliminated cement. I'm not saying everyone should do that, but certainly from our evidence, we wanted to eliminate it because we knew it would just make it cost prohibitive for most households. We found in villages that had been CLTS triggered, and particularly those that had really, I guess, had been a bright spark, really ignited in their triggering, we found there were people there who had really been thinking about these challenges. You know, they faced them. They had to rebuild every 6 to 12 months, or depending on when the rainy season came. So we found these people already had a lot of ideas and were actually ready to be unlocked. And this man here was one of those people, and he had been wanting to try this sandbag concept for a long time. And so having the opportunity through a participatory design session allowed that to be unlocked, and I think that might be an experience in other places. But I suggest just to give it a try, just to give it a go. If you feel like from your evidence base, from your market research or your formative research, you feel that products are an issue, that you don't either have the time, money, or interest in using a design team, an external design team, but you want to see what locals have already got within themselves, then I would say try it. A couple of good tools are the Sanitation Marketing for Managers guidelines, and of course the CLTS handbook talks a bit about this, and also I have some other references for you later on about how to apply this approach. We really embedded it, we tried to embed it into district government programs, because we knew that if we didn't, we would just do it once and then walk away. But we have a good team of people now who are capable of doing participatory design sessions in Malawi, and we're hoping they'll continue to roll out the process. And this relates to the third take-home message about safety and structural testing. We identified one academic or University of Misuza, as the product refinement and testing place. And now, of course, they've done all that refinement and testing. They're training people as well on this corporate design. So they've been holding their own courses now just on the corporate design construction process, and they've had a lot of interest from local NGOs, and they've actually had a couple of international people come across to learn a bit more about low-cost latrine construction. And a hot tip for that is we had one very good technically minded person who was also very good at the participatory design sessions, and he's been very good at taking the refinements back to the community, because participatory design isn't a one-off process. It's a lot of it's iterative, and you go back and forth, and it's important that you keep that process going to ensure there's ownership in the design process, and it maintains within the actual end users. So a couple of reflections, and I think it's within all participatory design processes. It's who owns the designs. In Australia, someone, if they came up with something good, they will patent it immediately and try and make cash out of it. So this process, we recognise we're taking it sometimes traditional knowledge, and it's known knowledge. It's across the board, but it's something just to consider. We did nine of these sessions. It's not a lot of sessions. Are there better designs still out there? And how do we go about, and how do you fund doing more of the sessions? And then also, when a chief is there, or a village head person, participatory, it's meant to be a democratic process. So you need to make sure you're allowing everyone to have an equal voice in the sessions. And actually having teams is quite good, because it makes it break into smaller groups and people feel a bit more comfortable speaking. So back to my take-home messages. I'm nearly at the end. It's the market research. I think it really lays the foundation. I mean, if you're perhaps in a country where you're having still a lot of open defecation, participatory design you might not need it, because you just need to run just a CLTS program with good follow-ups, and you need to just get people interested in having a latrine. But if you're finding, like the case was in Malawi, a lot of people had latrines that were collapsing and they were despondent with the product, then really I would suggest giving participatory design a try. And then if you do, sharing your experiences. And then if you do come up with innovative designs, if things do come out of the sessions, you need to make sure that they're structurally safe, that they're safe in regards to hygiene, that they're actually improving and reducing the amount of maybe exposure to helminths and soil, or actually making sure they're doing their primary purpose of isolating the shit from people. And then market testing. Would other people want to buy them? Are they the right price? Are the products available to actually construct them? So I'll stop there, and perhaps Jamie will summarise some of the key questions. But yeah, the learning's only just beginning. I'm sure other people have been doing very similar stuff, but I have to admit I haven't seen it written down. Maybe I didn't look in the right places, but I'd be very interested to see if there is more stuff written down. I'd love to see that, but also just to share your experiences. I think a couple of the big questions are, is it actually cost effective versus using a professional designer engineer? As a process, I believe in it. I believe engaging users in sanitation design is an important process, but is it cost effective? Then looking at the sort of shift towards marketing approaches and social marketing approaches, can we make designs or products out of it that are viable and profitable to be a business, and can you create a viable business model? For you, do you think you're getting, I don't know if that's colloquialism, it's a gut feeling, a sort of a sense. Do you think it might work and be suitable in your context? And then would it work in really complex sites? Would it work in Cambodia, where they live 100% of their time on water? So they're very complex, difficult. Maybe they need an engineer or someone who really can deal with the complexity. So a few links and thought provokers there for you, which hopefully they're sort of some of the key texts that might help you in your exploring your interest in participatory design. So thanks for listening. I spoke longer than I expected, but thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ben. That was very interesting. There are a number of questions coming through, and I've been trying to bring them all together. First of all, can everyone hear me? Okay. Ben, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Okay, great. So if you'd like to keep the questions coming throughout the discussion, and I'll do my best to try and bring a similar question to address them all. So we have a question regarding people's houses, and are they prone to collapse as well, and does this demotivate people to deal with the toilet if they also have to deal with fixing their houses?
No. What we found was that the key challenge was the substructure. So the market research really the market research revealed that very clearly, that the problem was the substructure, the bit below ground. So people were really comfortable with building mud walls with unburnt bricks, and then building very nice roofs with, they'd use like a taut black plastic underneath the thatch. And what we realized, and certainly speaking to engineers when we were showing them some of the early designs, they were saying, you know, people they build a lot above ground. Building below ground, you only really do it for your toilet. So there's just not that level of understanding and local knowledge towards building underground. So it was the underground component that we really focused the participatory design sessions on. It was developing a stable flooring. So yeah, that's a good question, because I didn't make that clear in the presentation. So
well,
yeah, I hope that.
Okay, well that leads on quite nicely to another question, which is, did the participatory design process focus only on the pits, or did you take other elements of the latrine?
What we found was that we did focus on the pits. So that was certainly for the first certainly the first 5 or 6 sessions we focused just on the pits, and then we did question why were we doing that? Like, why don't we open it up? And when we did, we realized that yeah, we probably should have opened it up earlier, because people were very interested in the roof and making a really viable roof that would protect the existing flooring structure, which was basically just wood with compressed mud inside, which I think is fairly ubiquitous across a lot of countries as the traditional latrine. And they were saying that in areas where there weren't termites, if they just stopped it getting wet, then that would solve a lot of their problems in regards to durability. So that was something, yeah, perhaps next time we would do a bit differently.
Okay, and then in a similar question, was the outcome just a single design? And is it possible to use participatory design to cater for different people's needs, such as people with disabilities or the elderly?
Well, firstly, no, certainly it wasn't the only design. From each of the design sessions, we would get about, well, up to like 4 or 5 designs that when they went to day 2 and actually prototyped them, actually put the materials, you know, on the ground, people were still arguing over, no, this is better than that. So that's where there was a process of refinement, where then as a group, and when villagers came to ask questions, we would sort of say, but of all of these, which 1 or 2 do you think are the best? And that kind of, I guess, narrowed the pool. It went from a big pool into a slightly narrower pool. And then we also engaged national government in having a look at some of the designs and saying, which of these do you think we should pursue? And that's the ones we took to the refinement stage, which was the corbelled latrine and also the the sandbag approach, and the other design, which was the photo of the sort of trapezium bricks. In regards to tackling for other like specific groups like disabled and elderly, absolutely. I mean, the design criteria we set was for the majority of villages. So we wanted a fairly ubiquitous, I mean, in the back of our minds we were thinking, can we make a business model out of this? And so we wanted to get the largest chunk of the market. But I believe, yeah, it could be used. And it's just a matter of setting your design criteria.
So were those least able part of the process, would you say? Part of the workshop?
They weren't actually. No, there weren't any. There weren't any disabled people engaged in the actual sessions.
Okay. And then we have some other questions. Another one was dealing with how to deal with expectations and how to overcome the issue that people often want what they have seen rather than having to develop their own ideas.
Yeah. Well, you do have to fight through that. We certainly did in the first part of the day, but we found it, we found as, I guess, facilitators of the sessions, we did get better at it. Well, I didn't facilitate all of them. It was government staff who sort of took on the role of facilitating. But they said they got better at deflecting it. But the expectation in Malawi was certainly we just want cement and we just want to build a big sand plat. Like that's all we need. And going backwards to using local materials is actually worse than not having a latrine. So there was big discussions about that. And really, particularly amongst the government, who were saying, well, you know, the subsidy's over. Like we don't have the resources, and government doesn't appear to be supporting any move back to subsidies. Neither do the donors, neither do the NGOs. So you need to embrace this as an opportunity to look at different options. Mm. And also we found that those expectations can be broken down a little bit of let's just stick with the conventional, because you've got 4 teams, so you make it a bit competitive, and that's always good for just drawing out innovation. Like people kind of were looking over each other's shoulders, and one team had a better design than the other, and so I mean it is a challenge, but I think it's a good one because I think it gets a dialogue going about, well, certainly in Malawi, the subsidy's over. Like we have to come up with solutions ourselves now.
Okay. Another question is asking, I think specifically about the first day, did discussions include getting participants' ideas about possible alternative locations of the latrines?
No, actually, we didn't pursue that, and it's a really interesting question because we really were just focusing on the sort of product design, not the location. But probably. Well, yeah, we'll be doing it again, and I think we would introduce that discussion because I think where they put it is central to how they regard it as a part of the home, and if it's basically somewhere they can get to at night, or else you basically cross off all potential defecation in the toilet at night because people clearly are fearful of going out if there's snakes around, or just the fear of sort of walking at night and not knowing where you're going. So. A good point, and definitely taken on board.
And then another one, this is a fairly long one. What is the outcome of the design workshop? Is it a kind of toilet catalogue or sanitation ladder? If yes, how is that linked afterwards to the CLTS process? Is that catalogue used for technical guidance to communities, or do they still have freedom to innovate and create their own designs?
In Malawi's case, we actually have only sort of had time and resources to focus on the cordwood latrine. We felt it was the strongest theme that was coming out from the design sessions, and we were actually working under a lens of a market-based or sanitation marketing program, and we thought that one might have the best potential to go out and sort of provide ongoing profitability and therefore sustainability with local suppliers. So from that we did refine the design. So we took it to Mzuzu University, and the technical designer Aaron Chiwa made some changes to the overall sizing and structure, and then we took it to a structural engineer who also conducted sort of a desktop review of it, and then we did load testing as well. So we put basically a 200 kilogram or 200 litre to 100 litre barrels on top of the cordwood latrine, and we load tested it for 8 weeks. So we did go through that process, and then Mzuzu University developed a manual on how to design it, and it's just a step-by-step manual. So through that process, that design has gone all the way through to refinement, and as I mentioned, we're now training people, like we've trained a number of local masons on that design. But we do encourage innovation and revision, and I think it's a really important part of participatory design, is encouraging that. We don't think the cordwood design is going to be right for everyone. You know, we think it's a pretty strong, we think it's very strong design, but we also think it could have a lot of potential for reducing pit collapse certainly in clay, only in clay soiled environments in Malawi. But I guess one of the challenges that I think we didn't really resolve in Malawi was getting a critical mass of government staff who were aware of the process of participatory design and could continue that sort of follow-up on innovation and reinvention. And I think that's something we recognise is a challenge to this approach, is having enough people on the ground who will remain in the villages and working with the communities to make sure the designs continue to be improved and updated both by users and by the designers.
Okay. And then, do you have any experiences to share on the negative impacts to the environment of using local materials?
We were asked this question a lot by the donor. The program was being funded by another donor, and they were concerned about the use of burnt bricks. So we did look at a very basic life cycle analysis, and we looked at the difference between using wood to burn a brick, or it takes up to about 300 to 400 bricks, versus regularly chopping down trees to replace with the wooden slab. And I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, it was rough. It was very rough analysis, but it came out about equal. So the amount of trees that you would need to burn the bricks versus the amount that you would use if you were replacing every year. That was assuming the corbelled latrine would last for 7 years. So that was also something we were targeting, was a 7-year lifespan. It came out equal. So that's in regards to, I guess, carbon emissions and deforestation. I think the designs are identical in regards to the potential for groundwater contamination, in that they're unlined pit latrines in very heavy clay soils, so the risk of groundwater contamination is very low.
Okay, so was it possible to make sure that these participatory design prototypes ensured safety and hygiene issues?
Well, that was the role of Misuza University in the refinement process, to make sure they did. And so one of the issues that came up was the impervious flooring. So although the corbelled latrine provided a sort of foundation, a floor, a foundation for the floor was still mud. So Misuza University looked at a number of local clays that could be used and sort of polished to create a more impervious floor and sort of replicate, I guess, the effect of cement. And so they did identify a few of those, and that's something that we're hoping will be integrated in the designs.
Okay, and then in the previous response you spoke about the design was for a 7-year lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
How did that compare to the traditional pits? How long were they lasting?
Oh, the market research was really clear. It was never more than 12 months, because the traditional pit latrines, certainly around the lakeshore areas and even areas in the clay soils that had a lot of termites, they just wouldn't last through a rainy season. So I think from memory it was 6 to 12 months in use of the traditional latrine.
Okay. And then moving on to a slightly different topic.
So Jamie, just to add to that answer, and what we really recognise is that obviously you can't, if your toilet collapses at the start of the rainy season, you can't rebuild during the rainy season. You have to not only wait for the rainy season to finish, but you have to wait for the soil to then dry sufficiently so that you can dig another pit. So you could be looking at maybe a 4 or 5 month gap of not having a latrine if it collapses at the start of the rainy season. And also it reduces that issue of habit building, which we know, or I think we're learning more and more in the sector, is so important. Just daily reinforcement of habits is so important in establishing sanitation behaviours and hand washing behaviours.
Yeah. And so what you speak about the rainy season, but what does that actually mean in Malawi? Like, how long does it last? Is it, does it cause flash flooding? Is it prolonged periods of flooding?
It's basically starts in, well, it should start in November, but it starts in earnest in December. And then it effectively rains, on average it's about, how much? Well, it rains every 1 to 2 days, and it's very, very heavy rain. And if you had followed Malawi this beginning of this year, it did flood very badly in the southern districts as well. But that was sort of an unusual, like 1 in 50 year type event. But normally the rain is very, very heavy, and goes for up to 3 to 4 months.
Okay. And then back to the workshop, what proportion of the community took part or were interested in the program, and how many women were involved?
Proportion, so the average village has about 100 people in, and we were just inviting 10 of them, so it was just 10% from one village. But we were working within groups of villages that had 3 to 4 villages, and we asked for representatives from each of those villages. So if you compare that though to, I mean, the average district has up to 120 villages. You know, it's not representative, and I mean, I think from a, yeah, I guess if you're using objective science, it's probably not overly representative. With women, we did make sure that there were as many women as men invited from the villager pool, but from sanitation suppliers, we just couldn't find any women who were existing sanitation suppliers. So in total, it was male dominated, but we certainly did the best we could to have female representation, and certainly the village health worker was predominantly female, so that kind of pushed the ratio up a bit, but I would say it was probably 60% men, 40% women in each team.
Okay. And then at which level or which stage of the CLTS process do you think would be the right time to use participatory design?
Well, I would say that it would depend on what your research tells you. If your market research is like before, even if maybe you haven't done a CLTS program, if you go to a community and you're finding quite low levels of ODF, and you're hearing a very consistent message about despondency about local, existing local designs, and you believe that participatory design is a way of firstly engaging people and also bringing out new interesting designs, then I would say you could use it straight away. But if a CLTS program has been is existing, and you've done your market research, and perhaps it says, yeah, people are they're jumping straight up to improve. Like they're happy with, they've got enough cash, they're buying maybe cement slabs, or they're doing whatever they can to make the latrines more durable. Maybe participatory design wouldn't be appropriate. But if you're finding CLTS is happening, and then you're getting research coming back to you saying, no, actually after just 2 or 3 months or after the last rainy season, we really found a lot of slippage, again, maybe then it's appropriate. So I think it really depends on what your research is telling you when you might want to build it in. But I do believe it's a natural fit to the I guess the later stages of CLTS. As I mentioned, the lead users, or what we term the lead users, they were natural leaders who were really engaged in sanitation. They wanted everyone to have a toilet, but they were getting frustrated with the lack of designs out there, and they'd already been thinking of ideas. So I think there it can be a really nice fit, and I think it aligns too of the sort of what the originators, Camel Carr and Robert Chambers, were thinking of when it talked about local innovations and supporting local innovations. If you've been using a participatory approach to get them interested and to create demand, why not continue that participatory approach through the design methodology?
And so was the participatory design related just to the technology itself, or do you think it can also be used to deal with the behavior change component?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean,
that's also from the audience.
Good audience. I think it could, to be honest. You know, I think, and I mean, this is qualitative research. This is not representative research. It's case studies. It's anecdotal. But certainly, what we found in Malawi is that it generated a lot of discussion and debate within the community about sanitation. And it was fun. It was 3 days of, interesting work getting done in the community. And a lot of people did start to walk past and talk about what was going on. So from that point of view, maybe it could have had an impact on behaviour change, but it definitely had an impact on the attitudes of the participants towards one another. Like the district government staff, the environmental health officers, I think purely because of lack of resources, they didn't get to spend much time with the communities. They just didn't have the fuel to get out there regularly. So to have that opportunity to just talk about sanitation for 3 days with actual suppliers and actual villagers really helped, well, firstly, talk a lot about the issue of the subsidy no longer existing. I think that was a good outcome, and I like to think those messages kind of start to diffuse once it's been well communicated to groups of people. And also, I think it helped with people thinking about, oh, maybe there's some local technologies out there that we could just start trying ourselves.
And then there also seems to be an interest about government involvement and how best to involve the government in a participatory design program.
Well, we were really lucky that the COTS program had been effectively nationally rolled out. I mean, it was in the policy. People were using COTS. Subsidy was out. So in regards to endorsement from national level legislation and policy, we were on sort of safe ground that they weren't going to start saying, oh, what's wrong with subsidies? And so we were already a long way down the track thanks to COTS.
And were there any laws or standards in Malawi regarding sanitation that were contradictory to the low-cost latrine designs?
There weren't actually, and that's also a very good question, because I know certainly Vietnam has very clear definitions of what they regard as acceptable sanitation. But Malawi's is currently just described more at a sort of policy level, and it just describes improved and unimproved latrine types. So I think that is a really good point. That's a really good point, is that if your country does have very strong sort of commitments to certain technologies, and the classic one is the VIP pit latrine, that's the only thing that's considered improved, then you might have more of a battle to be talking about innovations and traditional latrines being improved. So yeah, something to consider. But I guess taking it from, also going back to that market research, we really heard from people, they don't care what's an improved or basic latrine. Like, the definition means nothing to them. To them, the most important thing that came out was durability and easy to clean. So I think if we take it from a user's point of view, they're the attributes that maybe you could be arguing to government. These are the ones people really want.
We've also had a few questions regarding the training of staff for these projects and how long it takes. How difficult is it? If you could expand on that, that would be great.
Well,
the practicalities of actually starting a program like this.
Well, we found, the first one you do, it was a bit clunky. Like, we kind of were learning by doing, but we did find, so we attended the next two that the district government did themselves. We found that they were really getting the hang of it, because the process is quite fluid. It's like, what do you know now? What are the problems? How could you improve it? And then by day 2, you're all out doing physical work. So that it's not too bad. Logistically, administratively, you do need quite a bit of planning. You need to get organised beforehand. But actually, what we've been doing in the last training session is we were just getting the experienced facilitators to do a participatory design session, and then invite 3 or 4 other people from different districts to attend. And I mean, that was just a total rip-off from the CLTS approach, where you're never just sitting in a room training. You're always actually training through facilitation. So there's someone experienced showing someone not so experienced how to do it. And then you get an outcome as well, or you get to do the process as well. So that would be a good way of doing it. And yeah, I think that's all I could say on that.
Okay. And then we have a few questions about the context of the village you were working in. Were they fairly homogeneous in regards to income and social economic status?
They weren't overly homogeneous. I mean, there was some stratification. So we went back, where we did the market research in 2011, we went back to do the participatory design sessions. So we knew that they were that there was some stratification, but really there was a large pool that I guess you would classify as the most common household, which was households who were relying on subsistence agriculture that had a basic latrine that had collapsed in the last 12 months, and their disposable income was very low and certainly wasn't anywhere near the capacity to include cement in their home. And that's really the target audience that we were trying to design for. So when we use that design criteria, the majority of households, we would describe that to people and say, so what we're talking about is, you know, most people in the community. If there's 10 of you, try and design something that 8 of you might want.
Okay. And was there any discussion about emptying the pits once full? Was that ever considered as part of the design process?
It wasn't actually. Again, the research was pretty strong on the villages weren't overly dense in population, except in Mangochi, where people lived in much sort of higher density areas. But we didn't tackle the issue of pit emptying because we felt that a 7-year latrine would be a vast improvement on a 1-year latrine, because they would literally build they'd build a new pit. They wouldn't reuse a pit ever. They would just kind of leave it as abandoned land. So we felt that a 7-year sort of time frame was a big improvement, and yeah, we didn't get any further than that. So it's also a good question. I mean, what happens next? You could certainly take the bricks away and you could fill it in, similar to like a Fossa Alterna style latrine would be one option. But then if space becomes a problem, but we were finding in the majority of areas, space wasn't actually an issue.
So there was lots of space to be able to dig a second or third pit after these 7-year cycles?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And then is participatory design something that you think may be able to work in urban or peri-urban areas, or is this more orientated to the rural context?
No, I mean, I believe from just reading around and talking to people that have conducted participatory design in other sectors, architecture, particularly urban design, I've spoken to some people, IT, I mean, IT people are, you know, they really think, I mean, they call it co-design or co-creation. I mean, you know, they're sort of, you know, the whole open source approach. I mean, people are releasing knowledge and technology now to encourage people to come up with their own designs. So I think as a process, as a sort of a way of engaging the user, it's good and it can be used for urban and peri-urban environments. And one trial was done down in Blantyre, the southern sort of, or the main sort of city of, or industrial city of, or commercialized city of Malawi. And they did a participatory design session, and the feedback was positive. They said it was good. They used it to look at, I think, actually pit design and emptying. And they said just as a process, it was a good way to get, I think particularly they said to get municipal council people together with actual suppliers and actual emptiers, to get them all thinking about a solution together was, I think, the main outcome. And I think they came up with one technology that they thought might have some merit.
Okay. And then another question is regarding participatory approaches and whether they're only successful when people and staff are passionate about their work. And how do you work with people and staff who are less passionate? A nice
Yeah, that's a
difficult
good
one.
one. Yeah, I mean, it's always hard if people are really disengaged. But what we found in I mean, it's small samples, but I mean, I just remember in one place, clearly government staff were really not engaged. They just didn't really care about sanitation nor about this approach. But the users definitely did, and but particularly, yeah, the users wanted to get involved. And I mean, we found it's a bit infectious. If you're working in a team and you're just sitting sort of on the sideline, particularly if you're a government representative and you're sort of meant to be higher in the social hierarchy or however they want to be perceived, we found that was quite a compelling way of getting them engaged. I guess if you're in a community where the users don't want toilets and the government aren't interested in working in sanitation and the suppliers don't exist, then yeah, you would have a pretty tough 3 days, I imagine.
Hmm.
But
So
that's where
with
maybe,
sorry,
but that's where maybe doing CLTS to commence with might be a really good way to get people triggered, to get people engaged, to start with a traditional CLTS program. And to try and raise a bit of passion and interest in sanitation and the products.
okay. Well, then that leads on. You've kind of answered the next question I was going for, which is looking at how to convince people to participate in areas with a history, without a history of participation, especially.
Mm-hmm.
But I think your answer about using CLTS might be one way.
That might be one way, but I mean maybe the question saying they've tried CLTS and it was a damp match and there was no ignition and they're kind of a bit lost. But I would again go back to that message of, I mean, maybe do market research and find out what are the motivations and behaviours that are encouraging. I'm sure there's 1 or 2 people out there that have toilets. Why do they have toilets, and what's stopping other people? And maybe target the participatory design around that. Like maybe everyone's saying, oh, I don't know, I couldn't even give an example. But I think the first step would be finding out why. Why are people so unengaged?
And then we have a question regarding a business model. It was something which you touched upon in the presentation. That was, as I gather, it was what you were aiming for.
Yeah.
How did that go? What was the outcome?
No, to be frank, early evidence is showing it's going to be a really tough business model to make viable in rural Malawi. So early sort of evidence is that they are selling them, but it's very challenging for them to sell and then not get copycatted because it's using local materials with local building technologies. So what we looked at with Mzuzu University was trying to accredit them, and we made small laminated IDs and certificates. And what we'd like is for government to support and endorse these people as the only people who should be building the corbelled latrine, or we branded it, we called it I can only remember the English, but it's basically the sort of the strong latrine or the power latrine. But they were making, some of the masons were doing okay. They were sort of making a few sales, but they were certainly worried about existing masons just watching them build one once and then doing the exact same thing. So I guess in a way that is creating a business model, but we're not sure if it will necessarily be a successful business model with the entrepreneurs we targeted and trained.
Okay. Well, Ben, that's been a really interesting discussion. I've tried to address all the questions. If there's any more you feel like I haven't, this is to everyone. If there's any more you feel like I haven't addressed, perhaps put them in the chat box now. Otherwise, I'd like to thank Ben very much. It's been an interesting discussion, and I'm sure we'd all like to continue it in other forms. We have one more question, if that's okay with you, Ben.
Yeah, sure. And we should talk about, if people are interested, how we'll stay in touch.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking perhaps if people have any other questions, they could send them to me, and then I can send them to Ben, synthesize them, send them on to Ben, and then share them if people think.
That's good. And I'm happy to take that last question, but also Petra might have something to say in regards to how maybe also online we can stay in touch as well.
Yes, we will put the recording on the website, and there's also we'll start a new discussion on the Susanna forum and on the Sancop forum, which is linked to LinkedIn, so people can carry on the discussion then. But just for the final few questions, are there any experiences to share in the context where villages have been completely flooded once a year?
No, not from my experience. And in fact, I was asked that question, and I think that's something. I believe it's worth trying participatory design. I mean, we have tried, I guess, the traditional top-down engineering designer approach. I think there might be answers within the community, but when you come to those sorts of complex environments, the really sort of difficult environments, then there is a certain level, I guess, of technical know-how that you might need to respond. But I don't think that stops you trying and talking to existing users and existing sanitation suppliers and government, bringing them together and asking them, have you come up with any potential solutions? And maybe that would at least engage or spark new ideas and approaches. But to me personally, no, not areas that were completely inundated and flooded.
Okay, and then another question about participatory design in emergencies. Have you got any experience of that?
No. From my limited exposure to emergencies, I really, if it was maybe post sort of critical times, then perhaps it could be used, and it could be it's a very empowering approach. That's the whole idea of it. It's meant to be empowering for the user, and I know often disempowerment is one of the key sort of, I guess, psychosocial issues of an emergency. But I think in those critical phases, I'm not sure if it could be used just because of the time frame and those issues of structural and safety testing, and it just taking a bit long to get a toilet in the ground, basically.
Okay, and then a good final one is plans for the future. And is UNICEF going to be continuing this participatory design approach in Malawi or in other places?
Well, I can't actually speak for them. I'm not actually a staff member of UNICEF anymore, so I certainly hope so. I do. I really hope so. I know my colleagues there were really supportive of the approach, and we have now 15 of the 28 districts trained in participatory design. We have Masons getting trained in Corwood. We have Mzuzu University giving more training on low-cost sanitation. So I hope it continues. I think that's the only way I can answer that one.
Great. Well, Ben, thanks again. Please, everyone is welcome to stay in touch with me and other members of the Knowledge Hub and with Ben. So we'd love to keep the conversation going. And I hope I haven't missed any of your questions. And if I have, I'm very sorry. And as I said earlier, you're welcome to email them to me and I can send them on to Ben. But I think with that, on that note, I think I'd like to say goodbye, and it was great to hear from you, Ben.
Thanks to everyone. No, I really appreciate it, and I look forward to reading your answers to the questions, and I'm sure a lot of you have done this sort of thing before, so it'd be great to hear from you and to stay in touch.
Okay. Well, I hope everyone has a great day or evening, depending where they are. And we'll post the recording on our website and advertise it via Twitter. and we will, whatever information we gather from this, we will share. And thanks very much for all the questions and for everyone taking time out to join us today.